Right, there we go. All right, so let's start off with so we're going to be in First Corinthians 13. So if you have a Bible, you can turn there with us. And what we're going to do is the reason why we're starting in First Corinthians 13 rather than First Corinthians 1, right? If you saw my sermon on Sunday, I believe First Corinthians 13 is one of the more important keys to understanding how the whole book works. So once we kind of get the sense of First Corinthians 13, I think the other stuff will make a little more sense. This coming Sunday, we're going to be kind of focusing on chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. I know that's a lot for one Sunday, but you'll see how it works together when we do that. So, so Paul, right? So in order to pick up in First Corinthians 13, though, we need to understand Paul has been talking about spiritual gifts. And honestly, this is why First Corinthians 13 is so important. One of the biggest problems with First Corinthians or with the church in Corinth is there is this idea of there's competition in the church. There's a lot of self-importance, a lot of like arrogance, a lot of division. And so what Paul says is that the key to all of this is love. And so that's why when he talks, so we'll come back to spiritual gifts when we get to that part. But you need to know that's what he's talking about. And essentially what they're saying is that because I have this gift, I'm more important to the kingdom of God, right? So in many ways, you could say that very often pastors struggle with this, right? Because we have the gift of pastoring and I'm up front. Well, then clearly I'm the most important person on Sunday morning, right? I have to be here. It's right. There's this idea of that that having a certain kind of gift makes you more valuable, more important to the kingdom of God than other gifts. And so what Paul is saying is if we misunderstand all of this when so what he's going to do is give us love as the thing. So let's look at love. So we're in First Corinthians 13. He says, and still, this is actually 12:31 or second half of the second half of 31. He says, and yet I will show you the most excellent way, or more, the more excellent way of this. And then he's in verse 13, 1 through 4. He says, if I speak with the tongues of men or of angels, but I do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Now in chapter 12, he's been talking about speaking in tongues, which as Presbyterians, we don't do. But in some churches they do. And in Paul's church in Corinth, that was a big deal. So he says, but he says, if I have that ability to speak in those tongues, he says, but if I don't love other people, then I'm just making noise. And think about how a gong sounds, right? A gong doesn't have a melody. It doesn't even really have a note per se, right? You can't tune it so that it'll play. Like if you're playing a piano, you can't tune the gong so that it matches, right? It makes one noise and that's pretty much it. Now, it's sometimes helpful, but for the most part, it only does one thing. He says, so if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. And we can hear, there's one of the things that is making the Corinthians have divisions is not necessarily who's smarter or who's not, like it's not necessarily that, it's different ideologies. There are different ideologies and different philosophies. We're going to come back to that in just a second, but I want you to know that there's different philosophies that are going around. And he says, but if I understand all those things and I'm an expert in those things, but I don't have love, then I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. So what's he talking? He's talking about the things that we do that sort of seem to make us important, right? There's the idea of being very gifted, and that in what Paul says is that if we don't have love with our gifts, it doesn't do any good. He says if we have the ability to sort of discern, if we understand mysteries, if we know the prophecy, and the word prophecy here doesn't necessarily mean being able to tell the future. that's very little of what prophets actually do. What prophets do is prophets look at the world and they're able to understand really what's going on, right? They're able to sort of perceive, to make sense of the world. Um, he says, but if I understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, if I have all of those things, but I don't have love, then I'm nothing. And then the last thing he gives us, he says, if I'm incredibly generous, right? If I'm incredibly generous and I give everything I have to the poor, but I don't do it out of love, well, then then I don't gain anything from that. Right. And so there's the idea. Think about how our world operates. There's a world of ideas, there's a world of sort of knowledge and mysteries and all of that stuff. There's also in our world, this idea of being benevolent, right? Being generous and all those things. And what Paul says is, yeah, those things are great, but if you do good things, but you don't have love, then the good things don't do any good, right? There's no gain in that. There's nothing positive comes from that. And Paul is going to make this is a really important thing. So now, when you look at 1 Corinthians 13 and just stop it there, we have to ask ourselves, is Paul, certainly Paul's talking about Corinth, but is he also talking about 21st century Southern California, right? Is he still talking about those things? And I want you to think about how in Paul's day, there were different philosophies. Now, if you ever studied your Western civilization, right, you're in high school or college, they have these isms, right? You remember some of the isms, like Platonism. Remember Plato, Aristotle? There were the Stoics, the Epicureans, the Cynics. Actually, Cynics and Stoics are relatively similar. And then there's a host of other things, right? There's a host of other ways. And the whole idea about all of those isms, Platonism, Stoicism, Aristotelianism, all those things, the whole idea is that they helped us make sense of the world and learn how to live a virtuous life, right? Philosophy now is very different than philosophy in the ancient world. Philosophy now is, I mean, we sort of make fun of it, and honestly, it's become a laughable thing for a big chunk of it. But philosophers now sort of massage the details of everything, and it's like how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. Like it's questions that most of us don't think are very important to daily life. But philosophy in the ancient world was very much rooted in the daily life. What does it really mean to live a good life? What does it mean to be happy? What does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to what are all those things? Those are the important questions that we have. So those philosophies in the ancient world were really important. And Paul's saying there are philosophies now, but let's think about what philosophies or ideologies or ways of living in the world, what do you see in our world? If you were to say, like, let's say that you were, trying to talk to somebody about what faith is, and you're talking about what makes a person have a happy life, a good life, and also how do we know what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be virtuous? What does it mean to be ethically good, right? What are the options open to us? Have you ever, how do you know how to be good? How do you know what it means to be happy?
Be obedient, the word of God.
Okay, that's one sense. So as a Christian, we have a certain thing. But what other things, what other ways of being good, of being happy? What are the other options other than Christianity? Let's just take let's take Christianity off the table just for a second, because I think it's the best way of all of those ways. But let's think about other ways. If
kindness.
You have, what's that?
Kindness.
Okay, kindness is a hugely important in our culture. Compassion, kindness, caring, and so now the question is, and if you listen to my sermon, we'd ask, why should you be kind?
Yeah. Here we go. The why.
right?
Yeah.
That's an important question.
Yeah.
It's one that and I talked about this in my sermon. My kids very often will go to class and go to school, and they're told that they should be kind, but why is an important that's an important component in why you should be kind. And so, and honestly, the ancient philosophies, the Stoics, the Epicureans, the Cynics, Platonists, all those, they actually had good reasons. Well, maybe not good, but they had reasons. What in our culture, like, I just want you to see in our culture, how do we justify being good? How do we justify this? Because it's a rule. It's not like kindness is a good thing, right? Kindness is a law, right? If you aren't kind, you are a bad person,
Well, it
right?
helps us to get along.
Right. So there's a certain sense that says, look, it's pragmatic, right? It's like, if I'm nice to you, then you have to be nice to me.
Or
And
even
we
if
have to be
someone
nice to
isn't
each
nice
other.
to you, if you come back to them with kindness, it
Right.
helps to level things out.
Maybe they'll be kind. But the whole point is that what we're asking, why should I be kind? And ultimately, one of the questions is, well, I should be kind to them and they have to be kind to me, so that at least so it's self-preservation. It's like the idea that if we're not kind, we'll just fight with each other and we'll never get anything done, right? Or we'll all be miserable, right? There's a certain sense in which let's just all agree to be kind, except when we don't need to be kind, right? Because there's important times when you can't be kind to somebody who's racist, right? They just need to be told they're wrong. And kindness is not useful in that situation, right? Kindness needs to be, maybe you could do it in a kind way, but there's a certain point in time we say, well, but that's not acceptable, right? There's some things that are just not acceptable, no matter how nice I want to be to you. We have to draw the line somewhere. What else? What other we could also think about other religions, right? There's Buddhism, there's Islam, there's and in the United States, we kind of have a funny, like, we try to take sort of the best of, or what we think are the best of little things. And well, there's some Buddhism stuff that's pretty good, so we'll pull that in. And there's some reincarnation stuff over here, we might pull that in. And there's some, seriously, that just think about all the things that we sort of, kind of pull in and out. The reason why I want you to think about this is because what Paul is essentially saying is, in First Corinthians, in the whole letter of First Corinthians, is that the way Christians think about the world and think about how to be good and how to be, what does it mean to, live a virtuous life? What Paul is saying is that our way is superior to all those other ways. And he's in a world, remember, Paul is in a world, we talk about how people in our world, or we call it pluralism, right? It's like there's Jewish people and there's Muslims and there's, Catholics and there's Protestants and there's atheists and and we all live together, and and everybody's kind of trying to say that their way is the best way. But Paul lived in a world that had way more options than we do. Right. And he had, and next week we're going to talk about how they kind of talked with each other. What Paul is going to say is that all of these ways of living are in every way not as good as the way that Jesus shows us. And love is this thing that binds it together. Now, the truth is, in our Western culture, in modern 21st century America, even though we have largely, at least in schools and colleges and in our public discourse, we've largely tried to move God out, because we have this thing called separation of church and state, right? We can't have both. So we said we can talk about church, but church has to be in church and state has to be in state, and ne'er the twain shall meet, right? We shouldn't have mixing them up, right? But the problem is that what we've done is we've moved this idea of thinking about God. But most of the ethics that Americans hold dear are actually Christian ethics, right? They actually stem, like the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, right? That's the golden rule, but that is an explicitly sort of, at least there are other religions that have something similar to it that are not Christian or Jewish, but it is essentially a belief in God that stems that leads us to believe that. So the reason why I think this is important is because Paul's going to tell us about a love that is better than all the ways of thinking about the world. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this next week. So let's look at 4 through 7, which you've probably heard read at every wedding. If it's a Christian wedding, you've probably heard read at every wedding you've ever been to. It says, love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. So let's start there. That's a wonderful poem. But let's talk about some grammar for a second. And I know that grammar's always your favorite thing. But when it says love is patient, that's not actually what it says. The word patient, if you remember your grammar from 9th grade grammar, right? Love is, and then that next word is in English, it's what we call a predicate adjective, right? It's an adjective that describes what love is. But that's not what the Greek that's not what the Greek version says. The Greek says love is acting patiently. It's a verb, right? The verb to act patiently is a verb. It's not an adjective. Love is not a patient state of being. Love is when you go out and you act patiently, right? When you don't get frustrated that things aren't going your way exactly when you want them to happen, right? That you don't rush in when it's too early, right? You don't, right? Because impatience, right, is saying, things aren't going quickly enough for me, right? That's what impatience is. So patience says, I'm willing to hold back being angry, or even think about, I have control problems, right? Have you ever watched your kid try to unwrap something, and then you what do? You go, oh my gosh, stop out here, let me just do it for you. That's impatience. Even though you weren't mad about it, you're like, well, I just want to help them out. But are you helping them, right? Patience says, let's let them struggle a little bit, right? Let's let them learn how to open it. Let's let them do it, and then they figure it out on their own, right? That's a loving thing. And that's not necessarily like you're not angry about it, although you could be, like, wait, you're taking too long, hurry up. And it's very often acting when it's inappropriately. And so patience, so the Bible says that love acts patiently. And all of these things are all verbs. So it says love is kind. Love is not a kind state of being. Love is showing acts of kindness, right? That's what love is. It's an active thing. It's what we would call being proactive, right? Love is being proactive, right? It's not just sitting back and going, I have kind feelings towards you, right? No, it's like, no, kindness is, your friend is hurting and you bake them cookies, right? That's an act of kindness, or whatever else you can think of, right? Go on. It says it does not envy. It's not jealous. It doesn't say, I wish I had what you had, right? Which is the heart of envy. It doesn't boast. It doesn't brag about all the good things that it has. And you see how they're sometimes connected, patience and kindness, envy and bragging, because envy says, I wish I had what you had. Bragging says, don't you wish you had what I had, right? Don't you wish you were as good as, don't you wish you were, like me? It's not proud. And the word proud there, it means it doesn't puff itself up. It's not like all big. It doesn't say, hey, everybody, look at me. Like if you've ever seen a turkey or a peacock, right, strut its feathers, right? That's kind of the idea. It gets puffed up, right? It's like, it says, hey, world, everybody notice me, right? It's not proud. It doesn't do that. It does not dishonor others. This word means to be rude, right? It's not rude. It is, not those things. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. The word easily angered is the Greek word that means to be irritable, right? It's not irritable. And or grumpy. We might even say grumpy. It's like person you're like, you got to walk on eggshells around them because anything can set them off. And I had an uncle, I actually have a lot of people in my family, and I have to be honest, if I'm less like them than, in some ways, but I'm more like them than I'd like to admit. And so I can be a little, but those people that are touchy, right? They're right on the edge of fury at any moment. Those people, they get in a car and they become maniacs, right? They're just like, they're furious. Right. That's the idea. He says, love, it keeps no record of wrongs. And this is a huge one. Love doesn't keep score, right? It's like the idea that, well, you did 2 things bad to me, but I only did 1 thing bad. I have kids, and that's what kids do, right? She got the bigger piece. I got the smaller piece. He got 10 minutes of tablet time, and I only got 8 minutes of tablet time, right? Love doesn't keep score like that. She said this thing about me after I did such a nice thing for her, right? It's all of those things. It's love doesn't keep score. It doesn't delight when evil things happen, but it rejoices with the truth, right? There's very often, I'll see somebody go like screaming past me and then they get pulled over and I see them pulled over. It doesn't happen nearly enough in my opinion, but don't you like when you get it, you're like, finally they got what they deserved, right? What Paul says is, well, that's love doesn't do that. Love would never rejoice because something bad happened to them. Love rejoices with the truth, right? That's a very powerful thing. So I want you to think about this list. It says love, it always protects and always trusts and always hopes and always perseveres, and love never, and the word fails is the Greek word that means to fall down, right? Love never falls down. It doesn't ever give out. This is what true love is. Now, when you think about this list, is a beautiful list. And of course it's read at weddings because it's true at weddings, but Paul really was talking about the church, right? How we live with one another. And certainly how we live with our spouses would help. So let's talk about this, because the basic essential pattern here that we see is that love is not focused on ourselves, but it's focused on others, right? When you keep score, you're saying you hurt me and I want to make sure that I remember that you hurt me, right? If you're not in the center, then you can not keep track, right? You cannot keep score. So let's talk about, we have a couple of minutes. I'd like for you to let's talk about what this all means. Let's talk about how would we accomplish this? How do we do this? What does it mean? And do we see it very often, this kind of love?
I have to be honest, it's really hard right now.
It is. This is a very difficult thing. And think about what it says. Love always hopes, right? Think about how hope is hope is in short supply, even though there's even though there's a vaccine. I think what the pandemic has done is it's showed us who we truly are, right? We're angry and we're bitter and living with people, living with my kids, nonstop for 9 months now. I just realized how short I am with them. I'm before they would be gone for big chunks of the day and I would be gone for the big chunks of the day. We'd come back together. We all liked each other. And now we're with each other all the time. And it's hard, and I'm hard to live with. I have to be honest. So there's, this is a hard thing. And I think what the pandemic has done is it's shown us, as not just us as a church, but I just mean like LCPC as a church, but like all of us, it's shown us that I think that in some ways, how we go about doing discipleship, how we go about growing in Jesus, I think is somewhat flawed, because when hard pressed, these things become more difficult, right? we have to be practicing, I think, more often than we are. And it is hard. These are very difficult things. And throw in the political stuff. And then you've got, and not just political, not just America's political situation, but there's broken political systems all over. And, I know, Armine, you have connections to the Armenian community, in Armenia, and then there's their difficulties happening there as well. And so we bring all of that into our world, and that it makes it difficult. This kind of love is a very difficult thing. Anybody? So what would we do as a church? And let's just actually, since there's 6 of us here, what would you do? How do you grow? Obviously the Holy Spirit is going to do this. We're on Wednesday, we're going to be in Philippians 2 and think about Paul's model for this. But let's talk about, how do you do these things, for the next week? What would you do?
One thing I've been doing, Lee, is like for 2 hours at night before I go to sleep, I have a book that I've read before by Mark Batterson, Draw the Circle, and I'm kind of I've read it before, so I'm kind of just going through it and reading the highlights at the beginning and end of each chapter, and a little bit more than that. And then I listen to, on Pandora, I go to my hymns list, and I listen to hymns and pray, and it's really been helping me a lot to be calm at night and get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, there's something to be said. I mean, there's a reason why, Paul says, sing, say, rejoice, sing, let your hearts be filled. He says, what is it? Sing with all hymns and songs and spiritual songs, or songs from the Spirit. He would say, let that peace rule in your hearts. And that's one way to do it. I also think some ways in just practice. I think very often what we do know about human nature and how our brains work is that they are wired by habit, and we are habitual creatures. And it's not just like, the habit of like going to, the refrigerator, but how the things that we think about are habitual. Like if we focus on negative things, our brain will naturally focus on negative things. If we focus on positive things, good things, our brains will naturally think about those things. There's a fancy sort of equation in neuroscience, but it basically boils down to, in your brain, the neurons that fire together wire together. In other words, and I learned this when I was struggling with anxiety, is that your brain wires itself to just keep thinking about the same things. It's a loop. And so in many ways you have to break the loop and then replace it, with and scripture. That's why scripture memorization is such an important tool. It's why singing is such an important tool. All of those things help us rewire our brains to think differently, and then of course to have different habits. In some ways, I think what we need to do more than anything else as a church and as Christians is try to figure out, like, our culture, our culture tells us that in order to be really happy, we should focus on ourselves, right? I mean, and it's because we live in a culture that values, the individual and, being happy and all that. But we also are bombarded by people trying to sell us things that essentially say, if you have this, you will be happy, right? If you, and very often there are things that indulge me, right? That Big Mac will make me happy, right? That, that new car will make me happy. That new, repainting my house and having a new living room will make me happy. All of the, right? We're constantly bombarded with messages. And honestly, we're so bombarded with them that we very often tune them out, except for the fact that we don't tune them out. They're still, like, I don't know how subconsciously they work, but there's still this idea of our culture tells us consume, right? This will make you happy. And the Bible tells us that the opposite is true, right? Give yourself away, deny yourself, right? Live for, let others be more important than yourself, Paul says, right? Jesus says, if you're going to find your life, you have to lose it for my sake. These are the exact opposite. And so part of it is that our culture has become so focused on on us, that in order to break that, we're going to have to discipline ourselves in ways that take us out of the center. And that's a very difficult thing for us to do. It's difficult for me to do. Maybe it's easier for you, but it's really, really hard for me to do that. All right. Well, we are right about out of time, and I have to go to a staff meeting. So I will see you guys. This is, like I said, we're recording now, and this will be up on Facebook on Wednesday. So we're going to do Mondays for the foreseeable future. We're going to do Mondays and Wednesdays. And so Fridays, because we have to film on Fridays, and it's a kind of a difficult day for me to do it. So we'll do Mondays and Wednesdays. This coming Wednesday, we're going to talk again about 1 Corinthians, and we're also going to look at, I think, what Paul's model for self-giving is, and that's, of course, Jesus himself. And we'll look at Philippians chapter 2, and we'll kind of dig into that. In fact, which is by itself, Philippians 2 is probably a song, like a kind of a praise song that the early church sang, like a hymn that they sang. And so we'll kind of see how this works in and fits into what Paul really believes. I think it's the heart of how to do all the other things he's going to do in the whole letter to the Corinthians. So anyway, I will see you guys Wednesday. It'll be Wednesday at 9 with the same link and everything. So, but if you have any trouble or have any questions, just send me an email and we'll get you hooked up. Thank you guys, and I love you, and I hope you have a great day, and see you Wednesday.
Thank you, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.